All right, so we're diving into Jennifer Greenwood's Becoming Human. Today's topic is one that I think we all kind of take for granted. It's how we go from like these helpless little babies to the eloquent adults that we are today.
Yeah.
Being able to communicate and express ourselves in all these complex ways. This academic book goes deep into the development of human emotionality and how we acquire language. It's pulling insights from like psychology, philosophy. There's even a little bit of biosemantics in there. So get ready because we're going to unpack how those early cries and coos were actually sophisticated communication tools, how caregivers played a huge role in shaping our emotional responses, and the surprising link between feeling and speaking.
It's true. It's not just about, learning words. We're looking at the entire process of how we learn to feel, express, and understand our inner world and the world around us. It's really fascinating stuff.
The book starts off by reminding us that even Shakespeare himself recognized this amazing transformation, muling infants versus, well, the bard himself. But it seems like our understanding of this development has gone way beyond just studying the brain, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most interesting concepts that comes up in this book is something called transcranialism.
Transcranialism.
Transcranialism, yeah. Basically, it suggests that our minds aren't just confined to our brains. They actually incorporate elements of our environment.
So you're saying that, like, my surroundings are actually shaping how I think and feel.
But to really understand how this works, we need to start with the basics. Think about babies. They're born with these innate instincts.
Right, like crying when they're hungry.
Exactly. Or turning away from something that smells gross. Think of these as like their built-in emotional vocabulary.
So those reactions, they're more than just reflexes.
They're like these sophisticated tools for survival. The book calls them assistance soliciting devices.
Assistance soliciting devices.
Yeah, it's a fancy way of saying that they trigger caregiving responses from adults. That cry isn't just noise, it's a direct line to mom or dad saying, hey, I need something.
So it's like they're manipulating us from day one.
Well, maybe not manipulating, but definitely communicating.
Right.
And it's actually a two-way street. Those early expressions, they shape the caregiver's actions, but those actions then help the infant develop a more nuanced understanding of their own emotions.
Okay, so it's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, like think about how a parent's soothing voice or a comforting hug helped you feel safe as a child.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You started to associate those actions with feeling comforted.
It's like babies are decoding the language of emotions through these
The
interactions.
book talks about this thing called motor mimicry.
Motor mimicry, is that like when babies copy our facial expressions?
Yes, that's a huge part of it. By imitating, they begin to map those expressions onto their own internal feelings. They're building that emotional dictionary.
So they see a smile, they try to smile, and they start to connect that with a feeling of happiness.
Precisely. It's all about connecting those external expressions to those internal feelings. And as they develop, they start to refine those connections and understand those emotions on a much deeper level.
Wow, it's incredible how much is happening in those early years.
It really is. It's like they're laying the foundation for all those complex social and emotional skills they'll need later in life.
Okay, so we've got these babies with a basic emotional toolkit, and they're constantly learning through interactions. But where does language actually come into play? Like, when do they go from feeling to actually talking about those feelings?
Yeah, that's when things get even more fascinating because as children learn words, especially emotion words, it's like they're unlocking a whole new level of understanding and control over their feelings. Imagine going from I feel bad to being able to say I'm frustrated or I'm sad or I'm disappointed.
Right, right. So they're actually giving names to those big swirling emotions.
And the book refers to this as intrapersonal regulation, basically the ability to manage those emotions internally.
So being able to label them actually allows them to process them.
Right. It's like having a dialogue with yourself about what you're feeling. Okay, you're feeling anxious right now. What can I do to calm down? That kind of thing.
Wow. So language actually helps us tame our inner emotional world.
It does. And what's remarkable is that this book pointed out how learning emotion words is often a child's first real step into language acquisition.
So those feelings are actually shaping how we learn to talk in the first
It
place.
shows how interconnected human development really is. It's not nature versus nurture, it's both. Our biology and our social environment, especially language, are constantly interacting and shaping who we become.
And it all starts with those early emotional expressions.
Those cries, those coos, those smiles, they're the building blocks of everything that follows.
This is blowing my mind.
I know. It really makes you appreciate just how powerful those early interactions are.
I know.
and how they set the stage for all of our future relationships and experiences. It's quite remarkable when you think about it. So we've got these babies, they're starting to grasp their emotion, they're learning language, and they're constantly interacting with their environment. But this idea of transcranialism, this idea that our minds extend beyond our brains, it's still kind of a mystery, right?
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Like, how can something outside of my brain actually influence how I think and feel? It seems kind of abstract, right?
I know, it can be a bit mind-bending, but the book gives some really concrete examples of this. Like, remember we were talking about those early interactions between babies and their caregivers? Well, those interactions actually lay the groundwork for some of the most fundamental aspects of human communication.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Well, consider something as simple as pointing.
Pointing. Like when a baby points at something.
Seems like such a simple gesture, but it's actually a huge milestone in a child's development. And it's a perfect example of how our environment, especially our social interactions, become integrated into our cognitive processes.
Okay, I'm listening. Explain this to me.
Sure, so think about it. When a baby points at something, they're not just indicating an object, are they? They're seeking to share their attention with another person. They're saying, look at that, isn't that interesting? And when the caregiver responds by looking at the object and maybe even naming it, it creates this shared experience, this sense of connection.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like they're inviting the other person into their world.
And that's the beginning of something really powerful, something that's crucial for both language development and social interaction. The book calls it joint attention, and it's this ability to share focus and attention with another person.
Joint attention. Interesting.
And it's not just about babies and caregivers. Think about how you and I are having this conversation right now. We're both focused on this topic, responding to each other, building on each other's ideas. That's joint attention in action.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. So something as simple as pointing can actually lay the foundation for complex conversations like the one we're having right now.
It's incredible, isn't it? And it all comes back to this idea that our minds aren't confined to our brains, our environment, our interactions, those shared experiences, they all contribute to how we think and feel.
So it's not just about nature or nurture, it's about this constant interplay between the two.
It's like we're constantly in dialogue with the world around us, and those interactions shape who we become.
That's fascinating.
It really is. And, the book also talks about something called saccadic vision. Have you ever heard of that?
Saccadic vision? I don't think so.
So saccadic vision refers to the way our eyes move. They don't just smoothly scan our surroundings, they make these rapid, jerky movements, jumping from one point of interest to another. It's happening all the time, even as we speak, but we're usually not even aware of it.
Interesting. So it's like our eyes are constantly darting around, taking in information.
Precisely. And those movements are actually controlled by a very specific part of our brains. But here's the really cool part. It's not just about seeing what's in front of us. Those eye movements are also deeply intertwined with our environment, with our goals, and with our understanding of the world around us.
So it's not just about passively receiving visual information. It's about actively seeking it out and interpreting it. Like my eyes are actually searching for clues that will help me understand what's going on around me.
And those visual cues, they influence how we understand language, how we perceive emotions, how we navigate our social world.
It's like our environment is constantly giving us subtext.
That's a great way to put it. And think about how much we rely on those visual cues, along with social context and even technology, to understand and express our emotions today. Emojis, social media reactions. We're using our environment to communicate meaning in ways we never could before.
It's like our emotional vocabulary has expanded beyond words and facial expressions. We're using our entire world to communicate how we feel. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of emotional development that the book explores: the power of metaphor.
Yes, metaphors are such powerful tools for expressing emotions. And the book makes a really interesting argument, which is that our ability to understand and use metaphors isn't actually separate from how we process literal language. It's all part of this deeper drive to make meaning, to connect the dots, and to find patterns in the world around us.
Okay, explain that a little more.
Sure. So think about it. We don't just process words at face value. We're always trying to understand the underlying intent, the implied meaning. We're constantly searching for context, for clues, for those little hints that help us make sense of what's being said. And metaphors, they tap into that deeper level of meaning making. They allow us to express complex emotions that are difficult to capture in purely literal terms.
So instead of just saying, I'm sad, I might say, I'm feeling blue. And that somehow conveys a richer, more nuanced understanding of my emotional state.
It's like we're painting a picture with words evoking feelings and images that go beyond just stating facts. And we understand those metaphors because of the context, because of our shared understanding of how language works.
It's amazing how our brains are wired to make those connections, to seek that deeper meaning.
It is. And, the book gives a great example. It talks about the phrase, "you take my breath away." Literally, of course, that means someone's stopping you from breathing. But we all instantly understand the intended meaning.
Right, like someone so amazing they've stunned you.
It's about that feeling of awe, of being completely captivated by someone or something.
It's like metaphors allow us to bypass the literal and go straight for the emotional jugular.
That's a great way to put it. They're a form of emotional shorthand, evoking feelings and images that resonate on a much deeper level.
So instead of being like robots just spitting out words, we're actually weaving these intricate tapestries of meaning,
Yes.
drawing on our environment, our shared experiences, and even our biology to connect with each other on an emotional level. It's like communication is so much more than just exchanging information.
Absolutely.
It's about building connections, sharing experiences, and expressing the full range of human emotions.
Beautifully said, and it really speaks to the power of understanding emotional development. It gives us this whole new appreciation for the complexity of human communication, and it reminds us that we're all connected in ways we may not always realize.
So we've got these incredibly complex systems at play, shaping how we feel, how we express ourselves, and how we make sense of the world around us. But the book primarily focuses on that mother-infant relationship as the foundation for all of this.
She argues that all emotions, no matter how complex or seemingly basic, are inherently social.
Right.
They're constructed through interactions, particularly those early exchanges between an infant and their caregiver.
So you're saying even like a newborn's cry,
Yes,
it's more than just a physiological response.
exactly. It's not just a reflex.
Okay.
Greenwood refers to these early signals as emotion precursors or affect expressions.
Okay.
Think of them like raw ingredients, like distress, disgust, interest, even pleasure.
Right.
They're not fully formed emotions yet,
Right.
but they lay the groundwork for everything that comes later.
Okay, so I'm with you so far.
Yeah.
But how do we go from like a baby's cry to something like experiencing shame?
Right. Well, that's where the caregiver comes in.
Mm-hmm.
They play an absolutely critical role.
Okay.
They become architects, shaping those raw emotions into something more intricate.
So it's not just about soothing a distressed infant.
No, it's much more dynamic than that.
Right.
Greenwood calls it co-regulation.
Co-regulation, so there's this back and forth.
Exactly. It's an ongoing exchange.
But couldn't that be a point of vulnerability then?
Oh, absolutely.
Like in the development process?
You're right. That's a very insightful point.
Okay.
Because the caregiver isn't just providing comfort.
Right.
They're interpreting the infant's signals, ascribing meaning to them,
Okay.
and ultimately shaping those signals into more complex emotions.
So if that caregiver-infant relationship is off
Yeah.
or like disrupted in some way.
It can definitely have a huge impact
Okay.
on emotional development down the line.
That's kind of unsettling to think about.
It is.
So like with a crying baby,
Yeah.
you're saying the caregiver isn't just feeding them.
Right.
They're actually teaching them that discomfort means hunger.
They're providing that link
Yeah.
between the feeling and the need.
Okay.
And it happens through this constant back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The caregiver mirrors the infant's expressions,
Right.
giving them a framework for understanding. And at the same time, the infant is mimicking the caregiver,
Yeah.
learning the language of emotional expression.
It's like this feedback loop.
It is, absolutely.
Wow, this mirroring process.
Yeah.
It's really similar to language acquisition.
It is, yeah.
Does Greenwood talk about that at all? Like any linguistic theories?
She does. She actually brings up the work of the philosopher Ruth Millikan,
Okay.
who proposed this concept of biosemantics.
That was semantic.
It's a way of understanding how meaning emerges
Okay.
in biological systems, and Greenwood uses it to explain how even a baby's cry can have inherent intentionality.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Intentionality. You're saying a newborn is intentionally communicating something.
Well, not in a conscious, deliberate way, of course,
Right.
but from an evolutionary standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
These signals have a purpose. They're
Yeah.
designed to elicit specific responses from caregivers,
Right.
responses that are essential for survival.
So it's not just I feel bad.
No.
It's more like help me.
Targeted communication.
Right.
Honed over generations to ensure that the infant's needs are met.
That's pretty powerful.
It is, yeah.
So we start with these basic signals,
Right.
these precursors,
Mm-hmm.
with this kind of built-in intentionality.
Yeah, to get the caregiver's attention.
And through co-regulation,
Yeah.
they become more refined, and then language comes in, there shapes things.
And categorizes those emotions, leading to the development of these higher cognitive emotions, emotions that are intertwined with our thoughts and beliefs and values.
It's amazing to think that something so complex comes from those early cries and coos.
It is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And Greenwood's work really underscores that even those early expressions are part of this interactive process,
Right.
shaping who we become as emotional beings.
Okay, so we've established that emotions are fundamentally social constructs.
Mm-hmm.
But how much of our emotional development is actually influenced by culture?
Right, that's a great question.
Is there even such a thing as like a universal human emotion?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Greenwood acknowledges that we all start with those same basic building blocks.
Right, those precursors.
Exactly, the emotion precursors.
Okay.
But the way those get molded and expressed, that's where culture comes in.
Oh, interesting.
So a child raised in a culture that values stoicism
Yeah.
might express sadness very differently
Right?
from a child raised in a more emotionally expressive environment.
Are there other examples of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Greenwood talks about how in some cultures, anger is seen as a healthy expression,
Okay.
while in others, it's something that's suppressed.
Interesting.
And this impacts how children learn to both experience and display anger,
Wow.
and it can even influence how we perceive emotional expression in others.
So what we think of as an innate emotional response might actually be learned.
Even something like fear.
Okay.
What we fear, how we react, even how we show it.
It's all shaped by the lessons we absorb from our caregivers and our culture.
Think about it.
Yeah.
How has your own culture shaped your emotional expression?
Right. It's a great question to consider.
And how might that differ from someone raised in a totally different environment?
Yeah, really gets you thinking.
So if emotions are so heavily molded by our social world, what does that mean for mental health
That's a crucial question.
and well-being?
And it's one that Greenwood explores in depth.
Okay.
She introduces this concept called wide metaphysical realization.
Wide metaphysical realization.
Yeah, essentially she's challenging the idea that emotions are solely located in the brain.
Wait, you're saying emotions aren't just happening inside our heads?
Not entirely.
Okay, I'm listening.
Greenwood argues that the structures and processes that support emotional development actually extend beyond the individual brain and into the social environment.
So it's not just about neurons firing.
It's about much more than that.
All of these factors contribute to shaping our emotional landscape.
It's not just about what's happening inside me.
Right.
It's about my connection to everything around me.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
That's the point Greenwood really wants us to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions are relational.
Okay.
They're built through interactions and experiences.
So to understand emotions,
Yeah.
we need to consider that broader context. Someone's emotional state could actually be influenced by the people they're with.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's not just who we're with either.
Okay.
It's the cultural norms, the social expectations,
Right.
even the physical spaces we inhabit.
Okay.
All of these can influence how we experience and express emotions.
This is incredible.
It is, right?
I think we need a moment to let this all sink in.
Yeah, take a deep breath.
Greenwood's thesis is really challenging the way we typically think about emotions.
It is. It's groundbreaking work.
Okay, so Greenwood also points out that emotional development isn't just about becoming more sophisticated
Right.
in our expression.
It's not just about that. She talks about how emotional development also involves expanding our capacity for empathy and compassion.
Oh,
It's not just about refining our own emotional expression.
right.
It's also about understanding the emotions of others.
So emotional maturity isn't just recognizing that someone is sad.
No.
It's understanding why they're sad.
Exactly.
Like what's behind that sadness.
Right. That deeper understanding is really the foundation of empathy.
Okay.
It allows us to connect with others on an emotional level, to share their joys and sorrows,
Right.
to offer genuine support and compassion.
And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier,
Yeah,
about the caregiver's role.
absolutely.
It's not just about meeting those basic physical needs.
Right. It's much more than that.
But also providing that emotional scaffolding allows them to develop empathy later on.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The caregiver's response to an infant's emotional expression
Mm-hmm.
It shapes the child's understanding of the world.
Okay.
When a caregiver responds with sensitivity and validation,
Yeah.
they teach the child that their emotions matter,
Okay.
that they deserve to be heard.
Right.
And that lays the groundwork for their capacity for empathy.
It's amazing how those early interactions can have such a lasting impact.
It is. It really highlights how interconnected we are and how early experiences shape us, not just as individuals,
Right.
but as members of a society.
And this is where Greenwood brings up this analogy of the ant colony.
Ah, yes, the ant colony.
Okay, I'm curious. How do ants fit into all of this?
Well, think about it. An individual ant on its own isn't particularly complex,
Okay.
but the colony as a whole, it displays remarkable intelligence, organization,
Right.
even problem-solving abilities.
So you're saying the individual ant is like a single neuron, and the colony's collective intelligence emerges from their interaction, much like how the brain's complexity arises from interconnected neurons.
You got it.
Okay, I see the parallel.
Greenwood suggests that our emotional lives function in a similar way.
Interesting.
Our emotions aren't these isolated events happening inside us. They're
Right.
influenced by the social and cultural environment we're embedded in,
Yep. Okay.
just as an ant's behavior is shaped by the needs of the colony.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
But how does that connection actually play out? Like, what are the mechanisms at work?
Well, Greenwood points to a few key elements.
Okay.
First, there's the mirroring and mimicry we talked about earlier.
Right, with the caregiver and the infant.
Exactly. Those processes begin in infancy,
Okay.
but they continue throughout life.
Oh, interesting.
We're constantly picking up on emotional cues from others,
Mm-hmm.
and our own emotional responses are influenced by what we observe
Right.
and experience in our social interactions.
So if I'm surrounded by people who are generally happy,
Yeah.
I'm more likely to feel happy myself.
That's the idea.
And the reverse is true as well.
Precisely. We're incredibly sensitive to the emotional states of those around us.
Okay.
And it's not just about conscious feelings. It's
No.
happening subconsciously, too.
Oh.
Our brains are wired to detect subtle cues, expressions, body language, tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
All that information feeds into our own emotional responses.
It's like we're swimming in a sea of emotions,
That's a great way to put it.
being shaped by the currents around us.
Greenwood also highlights the role of language in all of this.
Okay. How so?
Well, language provides the means for us to share our emotional experiences.
Right.
It gives us the ability to label our feelings,
Okay.
to articulate what's going on inside of us,
Mm-hmm.
and to receive feedback and support.
So by putting words to our emotions,
Yeah,
we're not just expressing them.
right.
We're actually shaping how we experience them.
Absolutely. Language helps us make sense of our emotional world. By providing a framework for understanding and categorizing our feelings,
Right.
and that act of verbalization
Mm-hmm.
can actually change how emotions are processed in the brain.
This interconnectedness is fascinating,
It is.
but it makes me wonder if we're constantly being influenced by the emotions of others.
Yeah,
Do we ever really feel like ourselves?
that's a really important point.
Like, how do we maintain our own individual identity?
Greenwood acknowledges that it's a complex relationship between individual and social emotions.
Right.
She's not saying we're just puppets of our environment. We
Right.
each have unique experiences, personal histories
Mm-hmm.
that shape how we perceive and respond to the world.
So it's not about losing our individuality.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that our emotions are always embedded in a social context.
Right.
That context can be both enriching and challenging.
Right. Think about the power of collective emotions, like
Yeah.
the shared joy of a celebration or the collective grief of a community in mourning. These experiences can connect us in profound ways.
But of course, there's also the potential for negative influence,
Yeah, absolutely.
like constant exposure to negativity and stress.
Can definitely be detrimental to our well-being.
Right. So it's important to be mindful of the emotional environment we
Yes.
create for ourselves and for those around us.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to cultivate those positive emotional spaces.
Okay, so Greenwood doesn't shy away from the philosophical implications of all this.
No, she doesn't.
She even suggests that this wide metaphysical realization challenges the traditional mind-body problem.
Yeah, it really pushes us to reconsider those boundaries.
Right, so she's suggesting that our emotions aren't just in us.
Hmm.
They're part of this larger system that includes our relationships and our culture and our environment.
It's a pretty radical shift in thinking.
It really is.
Yeah,
So does Greenwood give us any examples
she does.
to illustrate how this wide metaphysical realization
Hmm.
might actually work?
She uses the analogy of language.
Okay.
Think about how learning a new language
Yeah,
can actually change the way you think and feel.
right. It's not just about the vocabulary.
It's not just about that.
Yeah.
It's about internalizing a whole new way of understanding the world.
Oh, that's a good example.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how different cultures might have different emotional languages, so to speak.
And by being exposed to those different languages,
Mm-hmm.
we can expand our own emotional vocabulary
Right.
and our capacity for empathy.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've explored how emotions develop,
Mm-hmm.
how they're shaped by our social world,
Right.
how they connect us to others.
It's all interconnected.
So is there like one key takeaway?
I think the most important thing to remember is that emotions are tools,
Okay.
not just abstract internal states.
Right.
They've evolved to help us navigate the social world, to connect with others, to build relationships,
Right.
to foster that sense of belonging.
That's a really beautiful way to put it.
Thank you.
It highlights the importance of understanding emotions
Yeah,
from an evolutionary and social perspective.
exactly. Not just a psychological one.
And if we understand the function of emotion, then we can learn to use them more effectively.
Absolutely. We can become more adept at regulating them, communicating them clearly, and ultimately building those stronger,
Right.
more compassionate relationships.
It's empowering to know that we're not just at the mercy of our emotions.
Right. We have the power to understand them, to
Mhm.
work with them,
Yeah.
and to use them to create a more fulfilling life.
And a more compassionate world. For anyone who wants to explore these ideas further,
Yeah.
we highly recommend checking out Jennifer Greenwood's book.
Becoming human.
It's a fascinating read that will definitely challenge your assumptions about emotions and their role in our lives.
I completely agree.
And that wraps up another deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another journey into the world of ideas.